you are a poet, you are a literary editor, and you are also a translator. I would like to start with your work as a poet. You have published 3 poetry books. The first one, The Scar Saloon, with Red Hen Press in 2004. It has, by the way, a companion CD. Mm-hmm. The second one is Rooftops of Tehran, also with Red Hen Press in 2008. I love this book. I love this book. And the third one is Keeping Time with Blue Hyacinths.
Yes, very good.
It's a tough word for me. And this is with the University of Arkansas in 2013. What is your first memory of poetry?
I was born in Iran and I lived there till I was 13 years old. And Iran is a country where people revere their poets and they live and breathe poetry. Even the uneducated bricklayer on a construction site can recite all kinds of poems for you. So it doesn't have to do with one's education or age to know our great poets. So, you know, my parents always read poetry, they recited poetry. On Fridays when we had our family over or we went over to their house, we would have a big lunch and then everyone would sit around and bring out a stack of poems written on cards, and we would shuffle it and everyone would pick one, and then we'd read that poem, and that would supposedly tell us our fortune. And it's like amazing how accurate it always was. And the teenagers that were naughty and had little love affairs, the card would always talk about love and that, you know, you have a lover, etc. It would freak them out.
The secrecy of love.
The secrecy, it was amazing. And then also we played this thing, as children, we played this game called Mushaire, that you would recite a line or a stanza of a poem by a poet, and then the other child would have to take the last letter of the stanza or the line and start a new poem.
And when was the beginning of you seeing yourself as a poet? I
always saw myself as a writer. I loved to read and I loved to write, but not really as I was always. I never gave my poetry to a magazine or anyone to read because I didn't think of myself worthy of calling myself a poet, because we have such great ancient and modern poets in Iran and elsewhere that I just didn't feel worthy. But it's really interesting. I was visiting, I went to Greece, and I went to Temple of Apollo, and I was wandering the temple, and all of a sudden something seized me, and I started writing poems that were not of me from before.
I see.
It was very strange, and in fact, several of the poems that I wrote there are in my first book. So after that, I started thinking, well, I would like to share some of these poems.
You say that poetry is condensed language with an internal music. Could you tell us a little bit about your writing process?
The reason I say poetry is condensed language, because for me, prose is like a whole meal. It's like your steak and potatoes and everything. Poetry is the sauce, which means everything has been cooked and simmered and simmered and simmered until you have that final sauce that is the essence of everything, you know?
Yeah. You say that being a foreigner everywhere, not belonging anywhere, can be disquieting, but once you are over that, it's liberating.
I've been moving since I was 13 years old. I mean, I went to Trinidad and lived with my aunt in a maternity clinic in a small village called Kufa. And then I went to England, I went to a boarding school, and then I came to this country. I went from city to city to city, and I lived, you know, with different, as you know, United States has its own different cultures in various areas. So at one point I realized, what am I nostalgic for? Really, I carry my home within me, and I have to look at that. And I think as a human being, that is a great evolution. I think if everyone in the world realized that their home is inside of themselves, then they begin to interact with one another a little bit differently and look at quote-unquote nationalism a little bit differently. I am writing every day based on who I am and how I feel. So all of that is connected. My being inside myself, outside myself, seeing others see me as something outside of themselves. All of these things will affect my own perception of myself and of other people.
I'm asking that because in some of your poems you present these cases of duplicity. For example, there is a poem that is called Los Angeles 2007. You're in a coffee house and there is a truck with mirrors and then you see yourself and there is this kind of multiplicity or duplicity. There is also another poem that I think somebody's walking on the sand on the beach and you have the person and the shadow and it's like two people but it's like one. And there are many cases where you introduce this other point of view, this other angle.
That has to do with my also fascination of quantum mechanics. I'm very much fascinated by the subatomic world because that is about possibilities and actualization. At any moment, anything is possible. And sometimes we forget that. And that includes us, our own actions, who we are, because at every moment, every thought that we have, every person that we are affects the world, whether we realize it or not. We're part of this web. And so this duplicity, this doubleness that I see is always between the world of what is and another possibility. So even good and evil is in that sense. Which is in one of the poems.
It's one of the poems,
yeah. Or seeing myself go by, reflected in that truck. There I go, a part of me, a possibility, and here I am. And what am I going to do with what is left behind? And I think if all of us sort of think a little bit about this possibilities and actualization, sometimes we may alter our behavior.
I would like you to read the poem The Outsider. It's in Rooftops of Tehran.
I know what it's like to be an outsider, a khareji. I know how English sounds when every word is only music. I know how it feels not to be an American, an English, a French, call them Amrikai, Ingilisi, Faransavi, and see me as alien, immigrant, Irani. But I've been here so long, they call me American, with an American husband and American children. But mark this, I do not belong anywhere. I have an accent in every language I speak.
Your language is very accessible, is understandable. It's not flat, you are multi-layered, but your poems are close by. And in many poems, you do a very effective blend. You have a soft tone, a soft voice, very fluid, but then you present painful, sometimes tragic content. You talk about war and discrimination against women, abuse, violence, but the tone stays very fluid, very gentle. How do you manage that dialogue between the soft and the harsh, between the delicate and the violent?
I don't believe in violently speaking of violence, right? I think I want, like any other writer, I want to be heard. Otherwise, I wouldn't publish my work. You know, I can be a writer and not publish. So I publish because I want to be heard. I write in a multi-layered way because I want to be understood by everyone at every level. I want a teenager to read my work and understand what he or she can get from it. and then from various other readings get to deeper levels. But I don't want to pick someone by their collars and, and tell them, I hate this, the world is violent, I am a foreigner, da 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 da. I don't think that's what poetry is. So the best way to reach someone is to let them drop whatever veil or whatever glass that exists between the two of you. The armor that all of us have up, because we just don't want to let anyone in. And so when you approach them with softness or musicality or comedy, that will go down, and then you can deliver your message, and it's just as effective. It's better, I think.
Yeah. In your book, Rooftops of Tehran, you have bread, herbs, hot beets, potatoes roasted on red coals, crunchy raw almonds, green plums, raisins, rice, roasted almonds. There's a lot of almonds. Crushed walnuts, sugar and pomegranate sauce, garlic and saffron, venison, ice cream, almond rice, saffron stew lamb, baklava, salted pistachios. What is this fascination with food?
Oh my God, you made me hungry all over again. Well, why not? I mean, I come from a Middle Eastern culture. I come from a culture that food really matters to us. I mean, if we get together, there has to be food. One of the things that I thought fascinating when I came to Western culture was like how you can enter someone's house and if they offer you anything, maybe it's a cup of tea or coffee. And that is unheard of if you go to an Iranian home. Even if you're a stranger, all of a sudden there is tea and there are drinks and there are pistachios and baklavas and what else do you want? You get fed because that is sign of hospitality for us.
We could say that your poems, or many of your poems, are socially relevant. They denounce and they create awareness about social injustice in many cases. And in some cases, your poems have a very explicit political content. Are these poems more difficult to write? Do you feel that you have a greater sense of responsibility?
Yes and no. I do feel a great sense of responsibility towards the poets who are living back in Iran. I don't I'm not a political person, nor do I write anything that is revolutionary or against a specific regime or government. I think poets in a way are truth tellers, they bear witness. And some of the poems that are labeled as political poetry, they're just basically me bearing witness to some of the things that I've seen and I've heard and how I feel about it coming from that region of the world, or seeing some of my poet friends thrown in jail, or my pregnant neighbor who was my age taken to jail because she was a Baha'i. Is writing these poems difficult? No, they are not for me because I don't force them. I've had students who sit down and they say, okay, I want to write political poems. Well, that's very hard, and usually they come out as preachy or angry. But when it comes naturally to you out of your own experience, whether you've been there or whether it's coming through your friends or compatriots or fellow poets and writers, then it's not, for me, it hasn't been that difficult.
Could you read the poem, I think it's called Rooftop?
Yes.
Because it's from your book, Rooftops of Tehran, and I think it's a perfect blend of the way you use your voice and the way you present the reality of your country of origin.
Rooftop. Rooftops of my childhood were flat, a place for sleeping on summer nights, on springy mattresses under mosquito nets, for grandmother's early calls to God, for sisters' secret rendezvous. There, I sought spirits among the twilight stars, but always my eyes, heavy as stones or sin, fell to the street below, where a neighbor rushed home for his supper, the salt seller pulled on his donkey's rein, or a servant girl hurried through, fresh bread under each arm. On that rooftop, I tasted my first kiss, read War and Peace in Farsi, watched the neighbor's teenage son decapitate his sister's cat because his sister wouldn't wear a headscarf to her classes at the university. That same boy became a morality policeman. He rode his motorcycle through the streets of Tehran, cutting women's bared arms with a poison razor blade. That was the beginning of the revolution in Iran, because they were forcing women to put on the headscarf, and women were refusing. They were fighting back.
Let's talk a little bit about your your work as a literary editor, which is probably also connected to these themes of the poets in your country of origin. Mm-hmm. And you have two publications. One is called Breaking the Jaws of Silence, mm-hmm. from 2013, and in 2012 you published The Forbidden Poems from Iran and Its Exiles, winner of the 2013 Midwest Book Award in Poetry. Could you talk a little bit about the history of these two books and your purpose or your intention when you put them together?
How The Forbidden came about was Atlanta Review in Atlanta does a literary journal that they dedicate to a different country, mm-hmm. every year. And the editor, Dan Veach, approached me and said, we want to do an Iran issue. Would you do that? So I said, of course, and I started collecting it. And he published it, and it became one of his best-selling issues. So after it was published, Michigan State University approached me and said, we really want to do an anthology. So would you please just do an anthology of those poems plus more? And what I wanted to do was to collect voices of the ancient and the modern, young and old, very well published and hardly published. Uh-huh. So it's a very balanced anthology. I brought other translations also as well into the anthology. After this was finished, I had been working with PEN USA, working on an event where we bring in poets, American poets, gifting a poem to PEN for the killing of Nidal Agha Sultan, who was killed in Iran, brutally. A cell phone captured her death, and it went viral, and it was in 2009, I believe. And I wanted, to have an event for that. And so many great poems came in from such wonderful poets, including David St. John, who is in one of these programs, mm-hmm. That I wanted to put together an anthology. So gathered 60 of these voices, prominent, one of the most prominent voices in the United States, several of them poet laureates, and we collected them. University of Arkansas Press was very eager. Before I could even send it out, they approached me and said, we will bring it out in 1 year, no problem, if you give it to us.
Two major works that you have done in translation. The first one is the poems of Farrokhzad.
Farrokhzad, absolutely.
Yeah, it's called Sin, and that book is the recipient of the Lois Roth Persian Translation Award. And then the second project is the translation into Persian of Walt Whitman's Song of Myself.
Yes.
This is part of a project of the international program at the University of Iowa. Could you talk a little bit about these two projects and how, like the origin of it and how they developed?
I was at a conference where Galway Canal was the speaker, and he had known this iconic Iranian poet Forough Farrokhzad who I had been reading since I had been a teenager. And of course she has a rock star status in Iran because she was the first woman who wrote completely from a perspective of a woman, sexually, socially, emotionally. She just basically completely changed the way women wrote poems in Iran, and she was part of this very powerful modernist group. So I went up to Galway and I told him, "Wow, I can't believe it! You met Forough Farrokhzad. She's one of my heroes." And he said, "Yes, and you know something? She really hasn't been translated by a poet who writes in English and who knows Persian language. Come on, you give it a try." For me, translation truly is recreation. Anyone can translate. Google can translate, right? But when you're translating poetry, it has to be a poem in the language you're translating into, right? So for me, that was the most important thing. I had to lend Forough Farrokhzad my own poetic language in English and then somehow imbue it with her spirit, and also not have the meanings be the same, not change what she was saying. I did majority of her later works and a selection of her earlier works. The poems that I omitted weren't because they weren't good, they were just not as translatable.
Yeah.
And I believe if you cannot do a wonderful job recreating a poem, leave it alone. Then University of Iowa's international program approached me, and they had this project where they're translating Walt Whitman's Song of Myself into at least 11 languages, and they wanted to translate it into Persian. So
this is the other way around. You're translating from English into Persian.
Yes, and it's not normally what I do because I don't write poetry in Persian. Then I wrote my dear friend Mohsen Ahmadi, who's a wonderful poet and whose poetry I had translated into English. And I said, "Mohsen, let's do this together." We had to translate one section per week, and then I had to deliver it at the end of the week. And I had to recite it orally, so it's audio, and I had to record it. It's fascinating because people think, "Oh, you just translate." No, we had to sometimes recreate words in Persian because the equivalent of it didn't exist in Persian, And sometimes one thing would mean so many things in Persian. Also, in Persian, sometimes some of our language has been hijacked by the Islamic Republic. So what used to be beautiful or poetic now has religious meanings. So we had to avoid those particular words because they just wouldn't match what Whitman was saying.
And you can hear the translation, is that right?
Yes, on their website, and it will soon be in print in Iran. So that's very exciting. But you definitely can go to their website. It's Whitman Web through the University of Iowa's international program, and you can see it, read it in many languages.
Any projects or any things that you would like to talk about?
I do have a play called Shame, and that has been received really, it's been received well by audiences here. We've had only staged readings of it, and so I'm looking for a stage to put it on. But it's about, consequences of one's culture when it comes to shame. It comes to things that are expected of us, and we want to break it, but we're afraid. I'm always working. That's if I can give any advice to young writers, is that never stop working. Always write. Never put that pen to rest, because then you lose it. You lose that connection to whatever's out there that guides your soul.
Could you close reading one poem from the Keeping Time book?
This is the fourth movement of the last section of the book, Keeping Time with Blue Hyacinths. And just to give you a sense of what it is a poem in 7 movements. And because Persian New Year has 7 items on the table. And so it just kind of takes you through a journey of culture and exile, etc., etc. The full reading
all
of
the
it,
objects start with an S.
all the objects start with an S. Yeah, but I include sin among them, but sin is not one of the objects we normally put there. But if your audiences are interested, a full performance of it, because I performed it in LACMA, is on YouTube and on my website.
On your website too, okay.
Yeah. We collect languages, flags, learn to cook macaroni and cheese, drink coffee and replace gugush with Madonna, Qarib Afshar with Jay Leno. But make no mistake, we never lose our voice. صدا ست فروغ فرخزاد تنها صداست صدا که جذب ذره های جهان خواهد شد چرا توقف کنم I channel her voice voice only voice remains voice seeping into time. Why should I stop?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be here.